Will was a lonely, middle-aged man whose life was so boring and stagnant that he pretty much had nothing left to live for. He eventually dies and is given another chance at life in a strange world as a newborn baby with red curly hair. Will opens his eyes and is introduced to three undead beings who go by the names Blood, Mary, and Gus. A few years go by and they now consider him to be some sort of genius because he is able to read and write despite being a 3-year-old. A couple years later, Will has finally hits his growth spurt and is seen lying on the ground in pain after getting beaten to a pulp by Blood during their daily physical training session. Blood expresses his disappointment in Will because he knows Will has great potential, but he's not working hard enough to live up to it. And during Will's magic training with Gus, Gus is just as disappointed in him because he fails to pronounce the incantation properly even after several attempts. Later that night, Mary goes to Will's room and tells him the story of both her and the other undead beings here. She gets a little carried away and informs Will that she and the others all used to be human at one point. However, due to tragic circumstances, they all died and held onto strong emotions, which caused them to form a pact with the god of the undead. This pact being formed meant that they are now considered to be traitors to the virtuous gods, which is why they are now cursed to be undead creatures. Will is moved by this sad story, so he is determined to keep on training and get stronger. The next day on the training field, Blood goes up against Will and suggests that they have a little sparring match, but Will doesn't like the sound of this because he knows he stands absolutely no chance at landing against Blood, so he has no hope of defeating him. But he's still about to try anyway. Shortly after, the fight begins and both Blood and Gus are impressed with how Will's magic abilities have improved since the last time. However, the fight still ends almost immediately as Blood slaps the sword right out of his hands. Even though Will didn't win the battle, Gus and Blood still commend him for his efforts because they noticed how much his combat and decision-making skills have improved since the last time. One evening, Will is seen walking back to his room after yet another gruesome training session. He looks ahead and is shocked to see Mary carrying a piece of bread and taking it into a strange room. Will thinks about this and recalls that it has always been a mystery as to where all the bread they ate came from, and he knows Mary doesn't know how to bake, so he is determined to get to the bottom of this. He quietly trails Mary until he arrives at a giant pair of wooden doors, and at first he feels guilty about being sneaking around like this, but he still decides to go through with it because he's curious to know the truth. He opens the door and is surprised to see Mary standing at an altar with blue flames surrounding her. Will assumes that Mary must be experiencing excruciating pain, so he rushes over to her without hesitation and places his hand over her shoulder in an attempt to push her out of the flame. However, he gets his left hand burnt in the process and then goes unconscious. He later wakes up on his bed to see Mary crying on her knees because she feels responsible for Will's hurt. But Blood and Gus both think Will is at fault here and scold him for being such an annoying brat. However, they also recognize his act of bravery in attempting to save Mary as he believes she was in danger. So since Will is still curious about the bread, Gus informs him that the bread is a gift that was given to them by the Earth Goddess. Also, Mary was on fire because she kind of betrayed the Earth Goddess in the past, and the goddess holds grudges, so merely being in the presence of the Earth Goddess is enough to engulf her in flames. But despite this, Mary still chooses to pray to her every morning and evening because she remains faithful to the Earth Goddess. Will understands this and decides to partake in the daily prayer alongside Mary in order to get a feel of how Mary lives her life. It has now been 5 years since this incident, and Will's hands have been able to heal over time. Mary informs him that she can help him get rid of the scars, but Will chooses to keep them because Blood told him they are his badge of manhood. Will is now a bit more mature, so he decides to start taking his magic studies and training a lot more serious, especially because Gus's magic lessons started to become way too intensive. It was almost as if Gus is deliberately trying to make him give up and quit, but Will's heart is strong, so quitting will probably be the last thing he would ever do. However, Gus's magic lessons are nothing compared to Blood's even more intensive physical combat training. Blood prepares a skeleton demon to spar with Will, for which he doesn't think he would stand a chance against. But to Blood's surprise, Will easily defeats the demon in a matter of mere seconds. Blood is immediately taken by surprise and then stares at Will while he acknowledges just how much he is improving. Blood decides to put Will to the test by taking him to an abandoned cave that's crawling with undead beings. Will's objective is to escape this abandoned cave without getting himself killed. Blood then extinguishes the lantern fire and exits quietly. Will begins to sweat and become aware of his surroundings at the moment the lantern goes off, but by the time he uses his magic to create a light source, he looked around to see that Blood has already disappeared. A few minutes later, he sits on the ground and eats some of his bread while he realizes that this must be a test to examine his overall practical ability. In this world, people attain adulthood by 15 years old, which means that Will would soon be sent out to hunt much more dangerous opponents. So at this thought, he stands up to his feet and is convinced that he has to complete this test and give back the best results possible. He is faced with his first demon opponent and is able to defeat it with ease. However, he breaks his weapon in the process, so he decides to loot the demon's weapon, which happens to be a magic spear. He walks along for a while until he notices a strange mist coming from the rear. He looks back and is surprised to see Gus standing behind him with a cold expression on his face. As Will walks over to him to understand what is going on, Gus summons a stone golem and it immediately begins to attack him. Will manages to defeat it by striking its weak spot with his spear. Just as Will thinks the test is over, Gus casts yet another magic spell, which causes several rocks to be sent flying his way. He barely manages to dodge all the attacks, but after a while, he begins to conclude that Gus may actually be trying to kill him. Will now makes up his mind to kill Gus since he had tried to kill him first. He charges at him with his magic spear, but decides to stop just as the spear is about to pierce him. At this point, the test is over, so Gus has a smile on his face while he apologizes to Will and says that he might have taken the test a little too far with his attacks. After this, they both exit the cave because the test has been concluded. Every now and then, Will goes over to the abandoned cave for Blood's lesson, with his initial weapon being a short sword. He would then loot weapons and armor from any enemies. It is later revealed to Will by Gus that the night of the winter solstice would be the moment where Will turns 15, which would make him ripe for the coming-of-age ritual, which would often took place among all the incoming adults of the land. Gus also informs Will that he would most likely be challenged by Blood to a one-on-one duel on the night of the winter solstice. Gus asks Will to intentionally lose the duel in a way that wouldn't be noticed. Will is confused by this, so he asks Gus for more details about it, but he replies saying that he can't explain it to him. Will is now annoyed at the fact that they always keep him in the dark whenever they ask him a question about something. He walks out of the room while telling Gus that he wouldn't be throwing the duel since Gus can't provide a reason for it. Yet another year elapses, and it's just about time for the winter solstice where Will would officially become an adult. He remained dedicated to his training over the last year and has made some significant improvements which Blood has acknowledged. However, he still remains curious as to why Gus had asked him to intentionally lose the one-on-one duel with Blood. A couple hours later, it is time for the duel between with Blood, so Will heads over to an open field with Mary where the match would be held. The rules of the duel are explained and the match is now underway. Blood starts off by overpowering him with a flurry of overhead sword attacks, but Will is able to parry them all with his trusty shield. He analyzes the fight and is aware that just a single head-on blow from Blood would be able to take him out. After this, he manages to create some separation from Blood and then starts to think of ways to close the gap between them both and end the duel in his favor. He closes his eyes and takes a deep breath while he realizes that the only chance he has would be to attack him head-on. Will then charges towards Blood at top speed, but right before the collision, he tilts his shield and lands on top of Blood, which causes him to fall backwards to the ground. Will sits on top of Blood and attempts to finish the job off by stabbing him in the ribs. But to his surprise, Blood manages to sustain the attack by trapping the sword between his ribs, after which he throws Will onto the floor and urges him to concede. Even though he lost the duel, Blood was still impressed by Will's performance, so he decides to gift him his magic sword, which is the highest-ranking demon blade of that world. Blood had always promised to explain to Will why he was the only human living among undead beings once he becomes an adult, so now that he has turned 15, he finally decides to spill the beans. It is now revealed to Will that many years ago there was an eagle god known as the High King who was so powerful that not even the best swordsman could land a hit on him. This High King had the rare ability to spawn demons out of his own flesh and blood, which was part of what made him so unstoppable. Blood, Mary, and Gus set out one night to attempt to defeat the High King, but they failed woefully even after trying every single trick they had up their sleeves. They could tell just how cooked they were, so the next best option was to seal the High King rather than defeating him. Another god known as Stagnate also felt it would be best for him if the High King was sealed, so he decided to make a deal with the three of them. Stagnate offered to make them undead immortals on the condition that they would stay and watch over the seal that's been placed over the High King. Stagnate aimed to create an eternally inert world with no tragedies by turning as many exceptional souls into undead beings. Blood, Gus, and Mary didn't have any other choice than to accept Stagnate's offer, So they took his hand and finalized the contract, which explains why they possess undead body forms. It has been 200 years since then, and the three of them have been diligent in protecting the city around them. Then, just as they believed that humanity has died out, they had stumbled upon baby Will. At this moment, Will understands that they failed to tell him this story because they didn't want him to know that he was intended to be a sacrifice to break the High King's seal. Just as this story is concluded, a dark cloud forms in the sky and Stagnate appears out of it. Will immediately falls to the ground and isn't able to get up. Gus then appears out of thin air and urges Will to get Blood and Mary out of that place while he does his best to battle Stagnate. After a little back and forth with Stagnate, Gus uses a quadruple cast spell to defeat Stagnate and make him disappear into thin air. At this point, Gus believes that the battle is over, so he turns his back and goes over to inquire about their conditions. Suddenly, Stagnate appears behind Gus and rips him in two, after which he attacks Blood and Mary, which make them fall to the ground. Stagnate walks over to Will and informs him that this is all his fault for making the three of them raise him as their son. Will hears this and falls to his knees because he is now starting to see the big picture. Stagnate asks Will to become an undead being as well so that he would be able to live together with the three of them for all eternity. However, he doesn't force him to give an answer immediately. Rather, he plans to wait for his decision tomorrow evening. After this, Will takes his family back home and starts to feel guilty for what has just happened. He now understands the reason why Gus was initially against them raising him as a baby. He wakes up the next morning to see his family looking over him. He gets up and starts to apologize for making them suffer for his sake, after which he breaks down into tears and informs them about his memories of a past life, but Mary knows that she raised a warrior, so she slaps him across the face to get him out of that mood. His family then gives him some words of encouragement and wish him some good luck on his battle against Stagnate. Will is now dressed in his armor and sets out on his mission to defeat Stagnate. On reaching the battlefield, Will informs him that he isn't going to be joining the undead. Stagnate is shocked by this response, so he sends some of his demon minions at Will to determine whether he is strong enough. Will is easily able to defeat the first round of skeleton demons. This impresses Stagnate, so calls off his minions and asks Will to join his side again. He proceeds to persuade him by saying that you would be able to spend an eternity with his family if he is to become an undead being. However, Will isn't buying that crap, so he uses his demon blade to land 3 consecutive blows on Stagnate before he is knocked unconscious. While he is unconscious, he runs into the God of Light, who helps him finally understand the significance of life and death, after which he forms a pact with the God of Light to become his guardian deity. Will wakes up from his coma and is suddenly filled with some divine energy, which helps him to defeat all of Stagnate's demon army with just a single slash of his blade. Now that it's just Stagnate left, he feels that he would be able to finish him off with his newfound divine power. Just as he is about to give the finishing blow, Stagnate disappears. It's now at this moment that Will turns back and realizes that Stagnate isn't actually after him, but rather his family instead. Will dashes back home at top speed with hope that he would be able to get there in time before anything happens. He reaches the prayer hall and sees that his family is about to get their souls taken by Stagnate. He feels like a real dummy because he has fallen for the oldest trick in the book, all while borrowing power from the God of Light, which put him and Stagnate on equal footing. Just as he feels that all hope is lost, the statue of the Earth God starts to glow a bright gold color, which distracts Stagnate for a few seconds and buys Will some time to launch a distraction. Stagnate buys the distraction and Blood immediately comes up behind him to land a heavy blow to the chest. Will follows this up by using his acceleration technique to push Stagnate against a wall and lands several slashes across his body, after which he finishes him off by stabbing him right through the chest while delivering a very corny catchphrase. Now with that stab to the chest, Stagnate the evil god has been killed. Will then runs over to his parents and gives them a warm hug because he is so relieved that this is all over. Sadly, it is later revealed to Will that Blood and Mary have completely lost their attachment, which basically means that it is now their time to die. Will doesn't take this news well, so he breaks down into tears and starts to cry because he can't believe that his parents are going to die. Blood and Mary see that he is upset, so they attempt to cheer him up by saying that he shouldn't be sad, because it is actually their wish to die. They both go on to give Will parental advice on how he is expected to live a diligent life. This little talk manages to lift Will's spirits, so he decides to make the most out of time he has left with them. Shortly after, they are all seen drinking some sake while celebrating Will's transition to adulthood. A couple days later, Will has finally found peace after his parents' death and is ready to focus on the life he has ahead of him. However, he still did well to visit their graves and say a prayer unto them while he bids them a temporary farewell. Will's two brain cells click all of a sudden, and he starts to wonder why Gus hadn't along with Blood and Mary. He kind of hoped on Gus kicking the bucket so that he would get to inherit his entire fortune. But unfortunately, he didn't. Even though Gus isn't going to be passing away for another 10 years or so, he still gives Will a sack filled with money and just tells him to make good use of it. Considering that Will was a serious brookie, he accepted it immediately and didn't even try to be modest because he knew that he would need money in any case. After a little while, Gus suggests that Will gets his surname since he is going out into the world. Gus's genius idea of combining Will's parents' names Mary and Blood to form the surname Mary Blood. Will hears it and immediately takes a liking to the name. He doesn't want Gus to feel left out, so he decides to use Gus' initial as his middle name. Then after this, Will bids Gus farewell as he sets out on his journey into the city. It's now been a while since Will has left the city of the dead, but he still hasn't met any humans so far. All he could see was the occasional wild animal and bizarre distorted demons. The deadness of the area makes him start to reason that no other humans have returned back to the city since then. He walks up for a while and smiles at the sight of what looks like a human civilization. However, he goes into this town but still doesn't see anyone else there. He passes through the woods and stumbles upon a giant boar jumping straight at him, so he simply uses his spear to stab it to death. He notices that there is an arrow in the boar's shoulder already, which leads him to believe that there was someone else trying to hunt that boar. He comes across a sus-looking elf named Menel. Judging by the pack of arrows he has on his backpack, Will already knows he is the one. After they eat some of the boar liver together and share the other parts of it amongst themselves, Menel is ready to leave. Will has no friends, so he suggests that they both travel together until they reach the next city, but Menel doesn't agree with this idea and tells Will to stay away and not follow him. After Menel leaves, he goes to sleep that night, and before he wakes up, he has a divine revelation where he sees Menel being caught up in some sort of disaster in the next town. Will gets up and uses his magic as a guide to locate the city, all with hope that he would be able to get there before the revelation takes place. Will gets there and is surprised to see that Menel is actually the perpetrator of this raid, so he urges the other villagers stay behind him while he handles things. Menel is now face to face with Will, and his arrow skills are absolute dog water, so Will is easily able to apprehend him and his crew. A villager named John starts a conversation with Will and informs him that Menel and the others are from a neighboring village. He believes that they had attempted to loot their village because they didn't have enough food and supplies stocked up for the winter. Shortly after, Will is introduced to the village chief, who goes by the name Bob. The other villagers insist on the raider being hanged to death without even hearing their reason for looting, but Bob wishes to hear their reasons for it first before taking any action. The next morning, the raiders are placed on an altar and start to tell everyone that a demon had attacked their village not long ago. This attack caused their village to lose all the food and supplies they had been stocking up for the past few months, which explains why they felt the need to raid the next village. Despite this being said, Bob still feels that they need to be killed because he knows that they would just come back to loot again if they released. Meanwhile, Will sees the sense in Bob's reasoning but still doesn't want any of them to get killed. He speaks up and offers the village a huge sum of money to pay for the items that Menel's village had stolen. Both Bob and the villagers are confused as to why Will would do this because he doesn't stand to gain anything from it. To add to this, he still volunteers to go over to Menel's village to defeat the demon that has been terrorizing them. He has also decided to recruit Menel to accompany him on this journey. During his journey with Menel, Will is excited because this is the first time he's traveling and spending the night with someone since he left the undead city. However, Menel doesn't reciprocate this excitement and gives Will the cold shoulder throughout the night they spend together. The next day, they both arrive at a misty environment which happens to be the ruins of the village temple. It's revealed to Will that a species known as the Manticore are performing some sort of ritual in there. Menel made it aware to Will that he wasn't going to help with the fighting, so Will goes in on his own. As expected, Will has no trouble defeating these monsters. However, a couple of them are about to escape from the ruins, but Menel uses his arrows to kill them. Menel observed Will and noticed that his strength is abnormal. He asks him whether he had undergone any intensive training before, but Will doesn't want to reveal his past, so he tells Menel that he's so strong because he eats a lot of bread. A couple good deeds later, Menel has gained some respect for him. He formerly believed that Will was just a rich kid who had gotten some divine protection, but he now understands that Will is just a guy with a good heart. Menel explores the ruins for a while until he decides to check up on the ghost of his old female village chief named Marble. He suggests that Will uses his divine power to help her ascend into the afterlife peacefully, since she has been stuck on Earth due to her lingering attachment. Before saying anything about that, Marble informs Will about the headquarters of the demon boss who stays at the top of the mountain. That is where all the demon minions come from, so Will figures that he would have to go there to solve the whole demon issue. She also tells Will that she wouldn't be needing help with her lingering attachment because she already has someone waiting for her. She gives Menel a goodbye hug and ascends into the air. A few days later, the villagers return. Though they are shocked to see the state the village is in, they pick up their farming tools and begin to bury the people that have been killed by the demon minions. Later in the night, the villagers decide to throw a party to mark their return to the village. Since Will is the savior who got their village back for them, they extend an invite to him, which he humbly accepts. On Will's way out, he is led by a fairy to an abandoned cliff with a beautiful view where he sees Menel sitting alone. He goes over to sit down with him, and they both start to bond over a conversation. Menel shares the story of his past, which Will finds to be quite fascinating. His narration starts to get so sad that Will even starts to feel bad for him. At the end, Menel humbles himself and expresses his gratitude to Will for how kind he has been up until that point. After which he goes down on one knee and asks to receive the blessing of the goddess of light. He and Menel get to bond on a deeper level, so Will is now convinced that he has just made his first ever friend. The next day, Will and Menel are in the village square where they intend to start rebuilding the village from square one. But Menel reminds Will that they are brokies, so he suggests that they go scavenging in ruins of the undead to make some money. The scavenging appears to be a huge success because they have managed to get enough money to rebuild the village, while also including livestock and other tools. After they walk for a while, they hear a loud female scream coming from the rear, so they turn their backs to check it out. Will immediately jumps into action at the moment he sees a giant ape terrorizing a man and little girl. He goes in front of the ape and maintains some very weird eye contact, which makes the ape to be anxious and just walks away. The little girl is really impressed that Will was able to make an ape to be that agitated just by looking at it. She introduces herself as Robina, but tells Will to just call her B for short, after which she points to the other guy and introduces him as Antonio the Hawker. Menel introduces himself and asks B and Antonio to come with them as a guide to a city known as White Sails, where they would be able to buy some items for the rebuilding of the village. They both agree to it because they owe Will that much for saving them for the giant ape. Antonio discovers that Will has the ability to heal wounded people with the power he is borrowing from the goddess of light, so he has an idea and figures that they could use it to make some more money. The main idea is for Will to draw in customers by giving them free treatments, and then getting them to buy something from Antonio afterwards. As time went on, they continued to pass through several villages, earning money using the same strategy. Then as they head north to stay for a couple weeks, they emerge at a wheat road, so they decide to spend the night there. The next morning, Will is seen outside practicing his spear skills. Antonio walks out and observes his refined attack movements, which leads him to believe that Will is a very strong guy. He and Will sit down and talk over some tea, where Antonio begins to ask him some questions. He has pretty much grasped Will's major reasoning, even though they have known each other for quite a short time. However, one thing he didn't understand was why Will was going through all this trouble without gaining anything directly. Antonio asks Will for what he truly desires because he finds it quite odd that someone works so hard with having any direct gain. Will thinks for a while and fails to answer Antonio's question because he can't really think of anything. But he instantly remembers that he has no friends, so he explains to Antonio that he would like to have some friends or companions at least. Antonio has no choice than to accept this answer from, so he ends the discussion. Then later in the day, the crew pack up their stuff and continue their journey. After several hours of travel, they finally arrive at the city of White Sails. Will explores the city with the crew and is marveled at how advanced it is compared to his hometown. He even sees some modern things which he had only ever seen in his previous life. He gets even more excited when he finds out that there is a public bath and sauna available to everyone. He has always used a skill known as words or purification to maintain his hygiene while on the road, but he still finds to it relaxing to take actual baths again. After this, Will goes over to the temple to pay respects to the high-ranking priest since he is a priest himself. He reaches the church and runs into one of the bishops. Once Will mentions that he is a priest of the goddess of light, the priest wishes to conduct a prayer of faith detection to know whether Will is truly a priest or just an enemy in disguise. He does this because the goddess of light is a minor god who has very few priests, so it's entirely possible that Will could actually be serving an evil god instead. Then all of a sudden, a fat guy who happens to be the vice bishop approaches them and asks Will who he is. After Will's introduction, Bishop Bagley takes a look at Will and is also skeptical about whether he is truly a priest or not. Will is aware that they don't believe him, so he offers to bless something in order to prove it, but he tells him not to bother because God's power isn't meant to be used ostentatiously. Will speaks some of the scriptures of the God of Light, which convinces Bagley, so he orders his subordinate to put his name down in the registry and do as he pleases. Later that day, as Will and his crew are lodged in a hotel room, they hear an emergency alert. He looks outside and is shocked to see a wyvern beast flying around and destroying some parts of the city. Without wasting any time, he heads onto the roof and begins to shoot some high-level magic at it, but it's too far away, so the shots don't connect. Metal sees how inefficient Will is being, so he yells while telling him to stop being a dummy and use his head rather than just firing random shots. Will calms himself down and tells Metal that he has a plan, but he is going to be needing the assistance of his fairies. He then begins to channel the God of Light's power, which allows him to form a shield around the temple. The wyvern flies straight into the shield and manages to break through it, but the shield actually wasn't meant to stop the wyvern, but rather to just slow it down. Now that the wyvern is slowed down, Metal uses his wind magic with so much force that it is able to break its neck and push it away and onto the ground. The people of Whitesail gather around Will and Metal to celebrate them for this great victory, and from that moment onwards they referred to Will as the Wyvern Killer. Will and Metal gained a lot of popularity because of this, even to the point that the Crown Prince had demanded to have a meeting with them. About an hour later, Will and Metal honored his invitation by visiting the royal palace that same evening. Prince Ethelbald receives them warmly and expresses his gratitude to them for saving the city from the wyvern. However, the prince still wishes to get some of the details of the techniques he had used to take down the wyvern because he knows it's not an easy task. Will just explains to a minimum and says that he used brute force along with assistance from Metal's fairies. Ethelbald finds this very impressive, and he also feels the need to repay them for this service, so he offers to give them a reward. Will asks Ethelbald to send out some soldiers to defeat the demons that are terrorizing the villages in the south. This form of request is unexpected by Ethelbald, so he begins to list a couple reasons why he thinks it wouldn't work out. Will hears his reasons and proposes a counteroffer, being that Ethelbald would just grant him the permission to hire some adventurers and soldiers with his own money to fight in the south. The prince still doesn't like the sound of this offer, so he starts to wonder whether things would be easier if he just kills Will instead. At this moment, Will realizes that he is demanding a lot of the prince by asking for permission for his forces to operate in a region which he doesn't govern. So he thinks about the possibility of a fight breaking out and realizes that there is a very low chance of success for him since he and Metal are outnumbered. Battle is out of the question, so he knows he has to resolve things here peacefully. Will composes himself and speaks calmly to Ethelbald about his reasons for demanding for an army, after which he goes down on one knee to plead once more. Right before Ethelbald can give a response to this, Bishop Bagley bursts into the room and is pissed off at the fact that Ethelbald has brought Will into the royal palace without his consent, especially since Will's name is signed in the register of his temple. Ethelbald doesn't really care about that, but goes on to inform him about the army that Will is demanding for. Bishop Bagley considers this to be a ridiculous request, so he feels that it would be a terrible idea for him to go ahead with it. However, Ethelbald is starting to think otherwise because he seems to take a liking to Will. He finally seals the deal by agreeing to Will's plea and also appoints him as a paladin to the Whitesails Kingdom, with Bishop Bagley being his patron. The bishop is upset about this, so he has a foul tone while telling Will that they would be leaving now. As they walk out, Will is introduced to Bishop Bagley's daughter Anna, who is also a strong believer as expected. However, she isn't Bishop Bagley's biological daughter, but rather his daughter by choice. She tells him about the story of how she met the bishop in the first place, which helps Will to understand that he actually has a kind heart but is just a little grumpy. Because of this, Will humbles himself and expresses his gratitude to the bishop for agreeing to be his patron. He admires Will's humility and starts to warm up to him from that moment onwards. He tells him that he has to remain in the chapel after evening prayer to receive further guidance, but Will is confused about what he means by evening prayer, so he inquires about it. The bishop finds out that he is fully unaware of the customs and rituals of that land, so he takes his time to explain it to him. The next day, Will hangs back after the evening prayer just as Bagley has asked. During this time, he is enlightened about the value of the blessing given by a god. He has been exposed to Bishop Bagley's calm and educated side, which causes him to gain loads of respect for him. However, Bagley still doesn't feel that Will is worthy of being appointed as a paladin, so he even offers to help him decline the appointment from Prince Ethelbald. However, despite the fact that Will doesn't know all that much about this city and its customs, he lets him know that he is willing to learn and isn't going to be turning down the position. With this, Bagley has no choice than to let the appointment go through. Later in the evening, Will goes to the local pub in search of adventurers who would be willing to go to the Beast Woods village in the south to fight the demons there. The adventurers at the pub don't seem to be enticed by the rewards which Will has listed. As the others are ranting about the low rewards, Restov, a long-haired man with loads of aura, tells them to shut up so that he would be able to get more details from Will about the quest. After Will explains the quest in more detail, Restov understands the danger that this mission poses, but unexpectedly, he still decides to go along with it as far as basic amenities such as food and a bed are provided. Apparently, Restov is seen to be a big dog among the other adventurers, so the others offer to join in because of him. The interested adventurers are brought for negotiation of what exactly their reward of choice would be. Will reasons that it would be best if he is able to heal the wounded adventurers and then pay a lower price. A couple hours later, all the adventurers have been settled, which means that everything has been placed in order for the defeat of the demon beasts in the south. The next day, Will goes to the royal palace where he is officially appointed as a knight of the White Sails Kingdom. Since that day, things begun to advance at a rapid pace. Having earned permission from the Crown Prince, Will sets off with his team of rowdy adventurers to begin the process of exterminating the dangerous monsters and demon beasts that have infested the southern village of Beastwoods. For the areas that were relatively safe, they brought in human supplies, which are the two things that every poor village would need. During this time, Will takes on the role of an arbitrator, whose job is to intervene in disputes among the villagers, which now takes a lot more of his time. A couple days later, Will notices that the atmosphere of the village is different due to the changes in development. The village is now considered to be relatively safe, so merchants from other villages stop by to purchase some items from the markets. One day, while Will is in his tent, Restov comes in to inform him that a party that was sent out to explore the area hasn't returned after 2 days of their expected return date. Will finds this quite strange because he knows that members of the party are really talented. But nevertheless, he instructs Restov to put another party together that would go out to search for them. As the squad begins the search in the woods, Will starts to get skeptical about the missing party just getting lost, but he rather thinks that they have been captured or killed by some nearby demons. They walk for a while until they see a valley filled with the corpses of the party they are searching for. A giant footprint is seen, which leads them to believe that it was a giant monster that had killed them. Moving forward, they see a trail of equipment leading to an area deeper into the valley, which confuses the crew because it would basically be a death sentence to run deeper into the valley. Despite that, the crew still decide to blindly follow the trail. They end up discovering it was all a trap set by the same demons that killed their comrades. Without wasting any time, the crew is ready to show these demons what they are made of, but Will uses his blessing to fortify them before that. During this battle, Menel is caught lacking, so he is thrown onto the ground in plain sight, after which the Chimera demon boss emerges and uses his fire breath to toast him. This causes Will to snap, so he uses his demon blade to recklessly slaughter every single demon in sight. At this point, the energy Will has left is 0 to none, but he knows that he needs to heal Menel, so he rushes over to him. Will kneels before him and the healing process goes on for a little while, but drains his energy until he faints. Then a couple hours later, Will wakes up in a bed at a nearby village. Restov sees that he has finally woken up, so he sits on the bed and gives him the gist of what happened after he passed out. After Restov leaves, Will is deep in thought and blames himself for what happened because he knew that they could have been successful in that battle if they had took more precautions rather than rushing in blindly. As Will walks over to the room where Menel is resting, he starts to think that it wasn't exactly his battle tactics that failed, but it was rather his overestimation of Menel's strength that caused him to put him in that dangerous situation. Shortly after, he reaches Menel's cabin and uses his blessing to heal him properly. At this point, Will realizes that he has just always been overdependent on people. He believes that he is strong enough, so from that moment forward, he vows to use the power of the light goddess properly and handle all his problems alone. Will leaves the cabin and is headed straight for the valley in an attempt to defeat the demon beasts and Chimera all on his own. Right before he's able to leave the woods, he is surprised to hear Menel call out his name and ask him where he is going. Will explains to Menel that he plans on going to defeat the Chimera beasts on his own since he and the other adventurers aren't up to the task. Menel doesn't quite agree with this decision, so he tells him to stop thinking like a madman. However, Will doesn't listen to his reasoning and just continues to walk on. Menel gets annoyed by this and attempts to attack him, but Will is able to dodge all the attacks with ease. Despite the obvious difference in strength, Menel still doesn't give up, so Will decides to break one of his arms so he would stop following him. But even with a broken arm, Menel proves stubborn and continues to challenge him. He focuses and uses his elf magic to launch an unavoidable attack on Will. This weakens him and provides an avenue for Menel to kick him straight in the gut. As Will is seated on the ground, Menel lets him know that he would be making a terrible decision if he's to go in on the mission alone. At this moment, Menel finally acknowledges Will as his friend and tells him that they need to stick together because that's just what friends do. Will then breaks down into tears as he hears that Menel referred to him as a friend, after which he comes back to his senses and apologizes to him for his dumb behavior. Menel helps Will get up and they both continue by exchanging stupid jokes and laughter as if nothing had happened. A couple minutes later, they go back to regroup with the rest of the squad, where Will suggests them going back to defeat the Chimera once and for all. Even though Menel was almost killed in a battle against it, he's still very excited to go back and show it who's boss. The other adventurers feel the same way and are also high in spirits. In order to appease them, Will states that each adventurer gets 1 silver coin for each demon head they bring back and 10 gold coins for who defeats a demon boss. After that, they spend a few days getting a strong force together and also send out several rounds of scouts to explore the area ahead of time. On the day of the big battle, Will leads his men into the battlefield and urges them to fight to their heart's content. The battle commences, and due to Will's preparations, his men excel in the battle with a flawless performance. Once Will acknowledges just how well the fight is going, he realizes that he couldn't have done all this by himself. This is because he now understands that the battlefield isn't an easy place. After the first wave of monsters have been defeated, Will and Menel arrive at a monastery where they don't seem to find anything. He thinks of this to be quite odd, so he uses his Erasure technique to terminate the invisibility cloak that it's hiding behind. The giant Chimera is then revealed to be standing right in front of them. Will then lets off a slight smoke because he knows it's about to go down. Through the power of teamwork, he and Menel are able to land several blows on the Chimera without sustaining any serious damage. However, the Chimera gets pissed off and its eyes begin to glow in vibrant red color. The Chimera then launches a heavy, strong attack at them, but it isn't enough to take them out. Will and Menel continue to work together and are able to defeat the Chimera once and for all, with Will striking his spear right through its face. After this has been done, they celebrate this victory and decide to move on into the monastery where the final demon is dwell. By the time they get there, they are surprised to see that Raystov is already there and has defeated the final boss all on his own, which means that Will would need to award him with 10 gold coins. He and Menel are a bit disappointed that Raystov has beaten them to it, but they can't be sad since they ended up winning. Shortly after, the rest of the crew arrive to see that the final boss has been defeated, which makes them scream to the top of their lungs and celebrate this massive victory. This was the end of the first season. Subscribe for more anime recaps.